we're moving into chapter 18. This chapter is about factors of production. So we've shown how firms make decisions depending on their costs and the revenue. So to maximize profit under 4 different market structures: perfect competition, monopoly, so these are the 2 extremes, and 2 in between, monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So now we're going to move to the last quarter or last part of this semester, where we'll look at factor markets. In particular, we're going to look at labor markets. So basically, labor is an important factor to produce, and so we'll look at this market. So here we'll look at how demand for labor is determined for a competitive firm. And then so that's labor demand, and then we'll look at labor supply, and then see how that determines the equilibrium of a labor market. So the equilibrium price will be equilibrium wage, that's the price for labor, and quantity would be employment, so how many workers you hire. And then we'll see how other inputs, we use the labor market as the leading example. Of course, you can think of other inputs and how those inputs are determined. All right, so let's start with a thorny question, especially in the US. In some sense, also in Taiwan as well. So this is a survey question asked American economists. The average US citizen would be better off if a large number of highly educated foreign workers were legally allowed to immigrate to the US each year. So agree or disagree? So, okay, so most of you here are not US citizens, so you can evaluate this situation from a sort of third-party perspective. Or maybe you could be one of the future foreign workers that would be allowed to immigrate to the US. Of course, in that sense, you would not be completely neutral. So do you agree or disagree with this statement? And more importantly, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? All right, so the first question, do you agree or disagree? The average US citizen will be better off if a large number of highly educated foreign workers were legally allowed to immigrate to the US each year. Okay, so a lot of you say agree, but some of you are not sure, some disagree. And so now let's look at the more empirical question. Do economists agree or disagree with this same statement? 100% economists agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49, 0%, or don't know. Okay, so let's look at your answers. So a lot of you say 50 to 99%, and some say 1 to 49%, and the answer is 50 to 99%. So let's take a look. So here we see that 95% of the economists actually agree with this statement. 5% are not sure, nobody disagrees. So okay, so in this sense, we're thinking about the average person in the society and whether or not they would benefit if there were legal immigrants of highly educated foreign workers arriving in this society. In Taiwan, we could also think about this issue because if you think of it, if we have foreign students here and they can stay to work, then does that mean that the jobs of domestic workers will be taken? That's an issue. Actually, it's precisely because of this that the government does not allow Chinese students to stay and work after they graduate. And of course, that's a very fiercely debated issue, whether or not we should or should not allow that. Different parties, different politicians have different opinions on this. Yeah, but anyway, so in this case, in the US survey question, The only thing that's specified is that these foreign workers are highly educated, and economists overwhelmingly agree that's a good thing. And of course, the obvious question for an average US citizen is, hey, but somebody will take my job. So that's the question that we're asking. Okay, so what are factors of production? Well, these are the inputs that produce goods and services. So you throw in inputs in this black box production, and then outputs come out. Traditionally, we think of this as land, labor, and capital. Yeah, so this is the old day. Actually, if you own land, then you are a landowner. You belong to that class of the elites that have a lot of land. And then if you're just a worker where you can provide labor, then that's another class. And of course, if you own capital, if you have a lot of money, then of course that's the third class. That's the sort of class struggle, the idea of the previous century. Nowadays, it's more blurred because a lot of people own a house themselves. And of course, that means that they are landowners and they work as workers. And if you invest in the stock market, you become a stockholder. And so you actually own shares of a company. So in that sense, you are also a capitalist. Okay, so the basic idea for this class is that we try to apply the same principles of supply-demand to these factor markets. To say, hey, I mean, land, labor, capital, these are not that different from other goods and services. They also obey the laws of supply and demand. But one thing is different here. When we talk about consumer demand, it depends on consumers' taste. But here, this demand, the factor demand, is what the producer wants. So here we call this derived demand. A company does not need to hire labor or use land or raise capital just because the company likes it. No, the company is doing this because it wants to use it to produce output. So this is what we call derived demand. So the demand of a company is derived from being a producer and supplying goods and services in the output market. So the input market and the output market are sort of linked together. It's because, so don't ask what the company can do for you, ask what you can do for the company. And so if you are very productive and you can bring in a lot of sales or help produce something, then of course the company can sell these goods and services on the product market and fortune, and hence that's your value. That's why the company wants to hire you. Okay, so here we are making assumptions. Two assumptions. First one, all markets are competitive. So we're only looking at the chapter 14 world where markets are competitive. And so firms are price takers in both the market for products and in the labor market, in the factor market. So the firms are price takers in both markets. This is the simple case. Okay, then we'll look at the second assumption. Firms, again, only maximize profit. It's not that the CEO loves to hire handsome men and pretty women because he loves to see beautiful faces every day, but it's because these employees can help the company to make money, to maximize profit. Okay, so here, the demand for these inputs are completely derived because you can supply outputs and maximize your profit, to make the most money. And of course, you can think of how the firm managers can deviate from this assumption. And of course, in reality, assuming that the firm is a price taker in both the labor market and the output market, that's also an assumption, which may or may not be true. Okay, so now we'll start with an example. So we have Xavier, who owns a popcorn truck. And so he is selling popcorn in a perfectly competitive market. And he's hiring workers from a perfectly competitive labor market. So it's not like he has market power to suppress the wages. He just takes whatever market wage as given and decides how much to hire. Okay, so when the manager decides how many workers to hire, he or she thinks about this at the margin. Let's think of it. So if you hire another worker, and if the benefit exceeds the cost, then you should hire another worker. Okay, so what is the benefit and cost for hiring one more worker? So the cost for hiring this additional worker is the wage. That's the price of labor. So if you think of a restaurant or this popcorn truck, hiring another worker, well, you have to pay the monthly wages, or maybe in the case of a popcorn truck, it's hourly wages, or if you work for 7-Eleven, you go by hourly wages. And so that's the price the employer has to pay for labor. What's the benefit? Well, you can produce and sell more output, so revenue goes up. So the size of this benefit depends on the production function. Actually, you guys saw this in the classroom experiment of chain production, where you guys try to produce chains of rings in groups of people. And then when you add another worker, you can see how many more chains you can produce. And so there's this relationship between how many labor input that's put in this production process and how much output you can produce. So you can figure out the additional gain for having another worker in production. Okay, so for example, so here's the popcorn production function. So with no workers, of course, you have no popcorn. With one worker, you can produce 30 buckets of popcorn, 2 workers, 55, 3 workers, 75, 4 workers, 90 buckets, and 5 workers, 100 buckets. So if you graph this, you get the production function. Okay, so the key thing here is what is the marginal product of labor, or what is the additional gain in output because of this additional unit of labor. And you guys saw this in the chain production experiment, that adding a second worker, a third worker, a fourth worker, depending on which group you are in, you have different marginal product of labor because the number of chains you could produce would increase in different amounts. But the change in quantity and output divided by the change in the amount of labor, that's the marginal product of labor. That's what you bring in to the company, and that's your contribution. The problem, well, the cost of hiring another worker is the wage. That's paid in dollars. But the benefit for having another worker, that's your marginal product of labor, that is calculated in units of output. So how can you compare apples and oranges? Well, one simple way, because we assume that the firm is a price taker in the product market, is you try to convert your marginal product of labor to dollars by multiplying MPL with the output price, the market price of the output. So if you can produce, if adding you, the company can produce 10 more chains, then that means that, well, each chain is worth $20. So your value of marginal product is 10 chains times $20 equals $200. So that's your VMPL. So this is the market value of your marginal product of labor. So, okay, so let's look at the popcorn truck production function, and we'll figure out the MPL and the VMPL. So we have the table, the production table, that shows the relationship between input and output, and say the price of popcorn is $5 per bucket of popcorn. So let's calculate the MPL and the VMPL, and let's try to fill in the blank space of the table. And then we'll try to graph the curve of the VMPL and its relationship with labor. And then finally, we'll ask, suppose the wages is $900 per day. How many workers should this popcorn truck owner decide to hire? Okay, so here's the production function or production table. So the relationship between number of workers and output or buckets of popcorn. So the marginal product, MPL, is the additional buckets of popcorn given another worker. So going from 0 to 1 worker, output increases from 0 to 30, so MPL is 30. Going from 1 to 2 workers, Now the output increases from 30 buckets to 55 buckets. So NPL is 25. And going from 2 to 3 workers, output increases from 55 to 75 buckets. So now the NPL is 20. And then 75 to 90, NPL is 15 buckets. 90 to 100, NPL is 10. So, okay, so this is the NPL. And then you can calculate the VNPL, which is the marginal product of labor multiplied by the market price. The market price is $5 per bucket. So you basically multiply 30 by 5, 150, 25 multiplied by 5, 125, and so on. One thing to note here is that this production function does exhibit diminishing marginal returns. So diminishing marginal product. Marginal product goes from 30 and drops to 25, 20, to 15, to 10. So you see this drop. And of course, that means that the value of the marginal product is also decreasing. Yeah, so you can plot this. You can plot the VNPL in relationship with the number of labor. So here, this is your VNPL curve. And it's downward sloping, reflecting that you have diminishing marginal product. Okay, so now we have the quiz question. So suppose the wage is $90 per day. How many workers should Xavier hire? Okay, so some of you say 2, 1, and the majority of you say 3, and 3 is the right answer. So let's take a look. The wage is $90 per day, so that's the cost of hiring another worker. So that's the vertical line here, $90. And so if you hire the first worker, the value of the first worker's marginal product is 150. So that's higher than 90, so you should hire this guy. The second worker, value of marginal product of labor is 125, still higher than 90, so you should hire this person. The third person's value of marginal product is 100, still higher than 90, so you should hire up to 3 workers. But the fourth worker has a VNPL only 75, so that's lower than the wage of $90 per day. Of course, that's not worth it. Okay, so you should hire 3 workers. So labor quantity is 3. Employment is 3. At any smaller labor, you could increase profit if you hire another worker. But if you hire fewer workers, you could increase profit because it's not worth it. Okay, so for any competitive profit maximizing firm, what you see here is that if you want to maximize profit, what you do is you have to hire the labor up to the amount where the value of marginal product equals to your wages. And so in that sense, the VNPL curve that we just derived is the labor demand curve. So at this wage, how much do you want to hire? And that depends on the VNPL curve. So that's literally the firm's labor demand curve. And so just like when we talked about supply and demand in chapter 4, we can see how demand curves shift. Here we can think about what would cause the labor demand curve to shift. And remember, the labor demand curve is the VNPL curve. The VNPL is calculated by multiplying the output price by the NPL. So any change in the output price would change labor demand. So yeah, so if Taiwanese products now could be sold at a higher price in the world market, of course what that means is that VNPL will actually go up. And so firms would demand more labor. Similarly, if you affect NPL, that could also cause the labor demand curve to shift. So for example, if there's an advancement in technology, and of course that means that the marginal product of labor is going up, that would also increase or cause the labor demand curve to shift to the right. Yeah, so for example, in our chain production experiment, we only gave each group one tape and one color pencil. But if we could provide more equipment, then the marginal product of labor or the additional gain for having another worker could actually go up. And so in that sense, so you have an advancement in technology or increase in equipment, and so that's actually better. And so, yeah, for example, instead of using a tape that's not easy to create a chain, if I give you a stapler, of course, that means that you can make chains faster. That advancement in technology would definitely increase your marginal product of labor. And what that means is that the labor demand would actually shift to the right. Yeah, so increasing MPL increases the demand for labor and shifts the demand curve to the right. Then the supply for other factors of production, yeah, so that also affects MPL. As I said, if I provide more color pencils or more tape or other equipment, then because of these additional factors of production, so yeah, that could increase your marginal product of labor. And of course, that's good for the firm. And so the firm would want to hire more labor. Okay, here we're going to look at the input demand and output supply. Think about marginal cost. Marginal cost is the cost for producing one additional unit. So that's the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. And in general, marginal cost equals to wages divided by MPL. Yeah, because to produce more, you need to hire another worker. So the additional cost is the wages, and the additional quantity that you produce is the marginal product of labor, is your MPL. Yeah, because to produce additional output, you hire more labor, and as labor goes up, MPL goes down. But wait, because you hire more workers, so MPL starts to decrease because of diminishing marginal product. But what that means is that if you calculate wage over MPL, that means, well, this is going up. So what that means is that marginal cost is going up. Okay, so let's go through this again. If you want to produce more output, you need to hire more labor. But because when you hire more labor, MPL goes down because of diminishing marginal product. But what that means is that wage over MPL is going up, or marginal cost is going up. This tells you that diminishing marginal product and increasing marginal cost are two sides of the same coin. So yeah, because of this linkage between input demand and output supply, you can link diminishing marginal product in the production process to increasing marginal cost. That's what you see in the product market. Similarly, the competitive firm rule for demanding labor is to price at VMPL, or to have the wage equal to the output price times MPL. And if you divide both sides by MPL, you get P, the output price, equals to wages over MPL. And remember, wages over MPL is marginal cost, so you get P equals to MC. That's exactly what you do when you are a competitive firm in a market of perfect competition. So input demand and output supply are again two sides of the same coin. So yeah, the linkage here is direct. So in the output market, you price at marginal cost, and in the input market, you are equating wages to the value of marginal product. And these two things are actually the same. Okay, so that's up to labor demand. So now we're going to move into labor supply. So here's the question. Why would somebody want to work? Well, because there is a trade-off between work and leisure. So if you spend more time working, less time to have fun. But if you don't work, you don't have money to have fun. So there's this trade-off you have to balance out. If you work like 200 hours a week or like 80 hours a week, I mean, you have no life. Actually, some of these workers in the high-tech industry, they work from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight. So they basically go home, take a bath, sleep, and then come back and then work. But if you're working like that, you have no life. You are paid extremely high wages for doing that, but you have no time to spend it. They have this joke that if you see all these mansions, huge houses, who is to enjoy those huge houses? Well, it's the housekeepers, because the owners are just so busy in work that they have no time to enjoy. Of course, that's one extreme. And the other extreme, of course, is, if you're jobless, you have no job, you have no wages, but you have tons of time. You don't have to work at all, right? So 24 hours a day, time is all yours. You can have fun, you can do whatever you want. But then if you want to go to the movies, you need money to pay for the movie ticket. If you want to go to Starbucks, you have to pay for your coffee. And of course, you do need to work. If you don't work at all, then you won't have the money to enjoy, to have fun, enjoy your leisure. But if you spend all of your time working, then you would have no time for leisure as well. And so there's the trade-off. What is the opportunity cost for leisure? And the answer is the wage that you give up. So think of yourself. So if you can work as a private tutor and earn 500 NT dollars per hour, then you can choose to go to the movies tonight with your friend for 2 hours. And what are you giving up? Well, you could have worked as a private tutor for 2 hours or say 3 hours, so you can earn 1,000 or 1,500 NT dollars in terms of salary. That's what you give up for, say, oh no, sorry, let's not do this week because I have a date. So you spend 2 or 3 hours to watch the movie. And so you're giving up this opportunity for earning those wages. All right, so of course what that means is that if your wages go up, the opportunity cost for enjoying leisure goes up. So suppose instead of an hourly wage of 500 NT dollars, so you are a professional lecturer where you lecture to hundreds of people. So what you're giving up is 5,000 NT dollars per hour. What that means is that, so going to watch Spider-Man No Way Home on Friday night, you're giving up not only 1,000 or 1,500 NT dollars, but 10,000 or 15,000 NT dollars. Is it worth it that you're going to have a date or watch movies? Now you have to reevaluate. But the key thing here is that, so you're thinking about what is the opportunity cost for going to the movies. They have this joke that if you're Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, seeing a dollar bill on the floor and picking it up is not worth it. Why? Because not only hourly wage, it's the second wage, so the 10-second wage of picking a dollar bill up. Well, the opportunity cost for a person that rich to do that is way higher than the value of that dollar bill. Okay, so that's the trade-off you have to think over there. All right, so that determines your labor supply curve. So the key thing is that, so when you increase wages, you are increasing the opportunity cost for leisure. And so people respond by taking less leisure and working more. So now you know where those high-tech workers who work 16 hours a day come from. They have super high wages so that they find the opportunity cost for having fun so high so that they literally have no life. That's really unfortunate. Okay, so the labor supply curve reflects this work-leisure trade-off. And so what causes a labor supply curve to shift? Well, the labor supply curve will shift when people change the amount they want to work at a given wage. Or suppose they change their taste or attitude towards work. There are stories of, like, say, Ah Xin, who's really fond of working. I remember my grandfather is also like that. Even on Chinese New Year's Day, he insists that he has to work. So if you're like that, then of course the labor supply will be very different from somebody who thinks, I need a life. And then of course, these attitudes or taste towards work, that would change the amount. And of course, whatever would change the amount they want to work at a given price would change that. If you start a family or if you have a child, then even given the same amount of wage, the amount of hours you were willing to work would actually change. Well, if there are alternative opportunities. Yeah, so for example, actually this week, there was this news on PTT that somebody was posting his interview experience or bad interview experience with one of a high-tech big company in Taiwan. And what I suspect, well, you guys don't know that story. You should Google that. So it was this computer science NTU graduate who interviewed with a big computer company. The story was that he went through several rounds of interviews and things went well. But the last round, one of the high-level executive or manager, but he basically intimidated him. So the interview did not really go well, and so he didn't get a job and so on. But then 2 years later, he decided to post this story and start to bash how bad these Taiwanese companies are treating their workers or treating these people that they interview. And if this person had no other opportunities, no alternatives, then it's likely that he would say, yes, you're right, I'll take your job for whatever wage you give me. But if instead of working for this particular company, he or she would have offers in other companies, or he or she could work abroad in the US or in China, in Hong Kong or Japan or whatever country, then of course his willingness to accept the offers that he sees locally will be very different. So if there's a change in alternative opportunities, of course, that would shift the labor supply curve. Immigration, so that's why at the very beginning we had talk about this. So when workers move from region to region or country to country, because of this immigration, so that would actually change the labor supply curve. And actually that is the fear of local citizens about immigration. So there are a lot of restrictions of whether or not foreign workers can work in Taiwan, because the Taiwanese society is afraid that these foreign workers would take all our jobs. Although, if you think of it, are there that many Taiwanese people willing to fill, like say, these empty positions in long-term care, like taking care of old people? No, nobody wants to do those jobs. So why not introduce foreign workers to take those jobs? But then things become even more trickier when you move to higher paid jobs, like say, should we introduce more foreign faculty, foreign professors to teach in universities? And they say, wait a minute, but then our local PhDs will have no job. So that's the sort of harshly debated issue in every country. But in any case, this reflects the fact that immigration would shift labor supply curve. And of course, I mean, like now if you have a lockdown where you're blocking this immigration, then of course that will also affect labor supply. Okay, so next question. So this one is very similar to the previous one. There's only one phrase that's changed. The average US citizen will be better off if a larger number of low-skilled foreign workers were legally allowed to enter the US each year. Do you agree or disagree? And do you think economists agree or disagree? And the key thing here is it's not highly educated, it's low-skilled workers. Okay, so first, do you agree or disagree? So a lot of you agree, some are not sure, some disagree. And so now let's look at, do you think economists agree or disagree? 100%, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0%, or don't know. Okay, so let's look at your answers. So a lot of you say 50 to 99%, some say 1 to 49%, and the answer is indeed 50 to 99%. Let's take a look. So this is surveyed in 2013. 63% of the US economists agreed with this statement, 27% were uncertain, and 10% disagree. So here you see that when you ask about highly educated foreign workers, 95% agree, nobody disagrees. But when you go to low-skilled foreign workers, then now it's still the majority agree, but there are a lot of people who are not sure, and 10% disagree. So you see that difference there. Okay, so we looked at labor demand and labor supply. Now we'll combine it to get the equilibrium of the labor market. So that's where supply and demand meet together. So it's balanced at this equilibrium wage. So remember, it always equals to VMPL because that's the labor demand curve. And so given this equilibrium, what that means is that anything that's changing VMPL so anything that's changing labor supply or labor demand, that would shift the equilibrium, or that means that equilibrium wage would change and VMPL would change as well. So let's take a look. Each of the following scenarios use a diagram of the market for domestic auto workers to find the effect on their wage and employment. Baby boomers who work in the high-tech industry retire. Foreign business preferences shift towards MIC instead of MIT, so made in China products instead of made in Taiwan. And technological progress boosts productivity in the high-tech manufacturing industry. Okay, so let's take a look. So scenario 1, baby boomers who work in the high-tech industry retire. So use a diagram for domestic workers to find the effect on their wage and employment. So what happens to wage and employment? Both of them go up, wages go up, employment goes down, wages go down, employment go up, or both go down. So let's look at your answers. Most of you say wages go up, employment goes down, and that is the right answer. So let's take a look. So this is the market for high-tech workers. The retirement for baby boomers, that means that the labor supply is now reduced because the number of workers willing to work at any given wage is now dropping because people retire. So you're shifting the labor supply curve to the left. That means wages go up because the new equilibrium, the new intersection of the labor supply curve and the labor demand curve, you have wages go up, employment goes down. Next one. So scenario 2, foreign business preferences shift toward made in China products instead of made in Taiwan products. So use the diagram of market for these workers to find the effect on wage and employment. Wage and employment both go up, wages go up, employment go down, or wages go down, employments go up, both go down. Yeah, which one? Okay, so here the majority of you say both wages and employment goes down, and that's the right answer. Let's take a look. So here, there's a fall in the demand for made in Taiwan products. So that means that the output price is reduced because now the demand for these products are shifting. And so what that means is that at each amount of employment, VMPL is going down because VMPL depends on this output price. So your demand curve is shifting to the left. And so that means that both wages and employment is going down. So now we'll look at part C. So the third scenario, which is technological progress boosts productivity in the high-tech manufacturing industry. So use the diagram of the market for domestic high-tech workers to find the effect on their wages and employment. So both wage and employment goes up, both goes down, wage go up, employment goes down, or wage goes down, employment goes up. The majority of you say both wages and employment goes up, and that's the right answer. So let's take a look. Here's the market for high-tech workers. At each employment amount, MPL goes up because you have a technological progress. So VMPL goes up. That means that the labor demand curve shifts to the right. And what that means is that at the new equilibrium, both employment and wage goes up. So in the US, we can actually see the relationship between productivity and wage growth. In one of the 10 principles, we have a country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. And the theory in this chapter implies that wage is tied up directly to labor productivity because wage equals to VMPL. And in the US data, it seems that things line up pretty well. So the growth in productivity or output per hour basically lines up with the growth in real wages. If you look at Taiwanese data, there's a lot of complaints about that the real wage is pretty flat in the past 20 years. So the question is it because productivity is also flat? Actually, no. So if you look at real hourly output, so that's labor productivity, it has been going up, that's the blue line. But the real hourly wage, hourly salary, has been flat since the 2000s. So here you see there's a discrepancy there. But before that, in the 80s and 90s, things line up pretty well as well. So one possibility, if you look at the consumer price index and the GDP deflator, you see that the deflator actually does not grow, although CPI does go up. Okay, anyway, both of these indicators are things you will learn in the spring semester. So it's in the principle of macroeconomics when we talk about inflation. So you should look forward to that. But it is true that one of my colleagues, Xu Chen, so he has a paper on how this flat real wage and the increase in labor productivity is a result of the exchange rate and how that affects what we call terms of trade. So anyway, so that's about international trade and the foreign exchange market. All of these are macroeconomic topics that you will see in the spring. So there is a discrepancy here, but at least we have a conjecture that this has something to do with the exchange rate. So even though labor productivity is going up, but real wage is staggering. Okay, so there's one thing I do want to note is a monopoly. Yeah, so this is a market with only one buyer. So we talked about monopoly, that's a market with one seller. A monopsony is a market with only one buyer. And so if you have a monopsony employer, then it would have market power. So it could increase profit by paying lower wages. So that could be a big problem because typically these big companies, they would have market power in the labor market. So of course, then they could suppress wages. So just like in the monopoly, well, the monopoly is going to charge a high price, markup, pricing above marginal costs, consumer surplus is suffering. And so the flip side here, when you have a monopsony, then the wages will be suppressed, so you have much lower wages because you have the single buyer with market power to charge a low price. So this would also reduce total surplus, cause deadweight loss. And monopsonies are rare in the real world. I think the leading example I can think of in Taiwan is our national health insurance. So that is the single buyer of health services in Taiwan. Even though nowadays you have all these 自费 cosmetic surgeries and these other things that doctors and hospitals charge and that do not go to the national health insurance. But I think it's no doubt that the national health insurance has a lot of market power because even if it's not the only buyer, but it's definitely the single big buyer of health services in Taiwan. Okay, so up to here we talked about the focus on the labor market. Then now we're going to move on to land and capital. One thing we do want to distinguish is what we call purchase price. That's the price you pay to own this factor forever, versus the rental price, where you pay to use this factor for a given period of time. For office space, you could buy an office. That means that you own this office space forever. But typically, firms rent an office space. And of course, that means that, if you sign a rental contract for 1 year, or if it's a month-to-month, so you pay monthly rent to use each month. And of course, if you sign a yearly contract, then it's for the whole year. But that's it. You can renew the contract, but that's another contract. And so we're not talking about slavery here. So wage is the rental price for labor. It's not that I own this employee, this worker forever. That's slavery. That's illegal in most countries. So I pay so that you work, say, 40 hours per week. Or for hourly workers, so I pay hourly wage for each hour that you work for me. So it's like the employer, the company is renting your time. So, okay, when we talk about rental prices for land or capital, it's similar to how you determine wage. Just like in the labor market, you have labor demand and labor supply, so you get wage as the equilibrium price. So you have land demand and land supply, and capital demand, capital supply, and of course the equilibrium of these different markets would determine the rental price for land and capital. So theoretically, the purchase price should equal to, well, I mean, but owning something means you rent it forever, for example. So, I mean, if you're a company, you can choose to buy the office space, or you can choose to rent the office space forever. So the relationship between the rental price and the purchase price should be something like this. So I rent this forever, I rent this office space, or I rent this house forever. It's like I'm just going to buy the house. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? I mean, the rental price may go up. Next year, it could go down, depending on different factors. And there's discounting because the rental price I pay tomorrow is worth, I mean, there's inflation, there's time discounting. So having the money now, I need to do some calculation. But the basic principle there is that if renting this office forever is cheaper than buying it, then companies would just choose to rent it. And if buying it is cheaper, then of course company would choose to buy it. All right, so how rental price of land is determined. So you can think about the land, here's the market for land. And so firms choose to increase the quantity of land to rent until the value of the marginal product of land equals to the land's rental price. So this gives you the land demand. The demand for land is determined by the VMP of land, just like the labor demand is determined by the VMP of labor. So again, rental prices of land adjust to balance the supply and demand for land. Here, land is more of an inelastic supply because there's only a fixed amount of land. It's not like we can create more land. But the basic principles of what you saw in the labor market would also apply here in the market for land. Similarly, for the market for capital, so again, you look at what is the value of marginal product for capital, and you choose to hire a capital up to the quantity that the market price, the capital's rental price, equals to this VMP for capital. And of course, again, so you have capital supply, capital demand, and so the equilibrium price, this rental price, will be balancing supply and demand. Okay, so if you think of it, suppose you buy a unit of capital or land, that means you can rent it out and get a stream of rental income. So the rental income in any period equals to the VMP of this capital or land. So what this means is that the equilibrium purchase price for a factor depends on both current VMP and expected future VMP in the future periods. And so, of course, but what that means is that if productivity goes up, then of course land price or capital price would also go up. It depends on the future VMPs, because if land becomes more valuable, it's more productive in the future, then of course the expected VMP in the future periods will go up. Okay, so up to here we've seen different factor markets. But you have to remember, these factors are linked together. Well, because you use these factors of productions together. So what this means is that the productivity of labor depends on how much capital, how much land is there. So one leading example in your classroom experiment, you already saw this. When you have chain production, when each group has only one color pencil and one piece of tape, well, having 4 workers, usually you have even negative marginal product. Having too much labor does not really help. But if I decided to give you more pencil or more tape, or if I give you a stapler, when I change the other factors of production, well, this would increase the marginal product of labor. And so, yeah, so for example, yeah, so here the textbook example is that if we increase the amount of capital, then the marginal product and rental price of capital is going to go down because of diminishing marginal product. But having more capital makes workers more productive. So NPL and wage goes up. So here you see that if you hire more of this factor, of course the NPL for this factor is going to go down. And of course what that means is that the factor market equilibrium rental price will go down. But because you have more of this factor, the factor market of the other markets are affected. So the NPL of other factors of production are actually going to go up. And so the rental price for these other things are going to go up. So it's actually good that a company is going to invest a lot in capital or in factories, equipment, and these other factors of production, because that increases the marginal product of labor, because labor becomes more productive, given you have all these other equipment to help each worker. And because of that, so of course, the equilibrium wage of labor is going to be high. Okay, so I think third and last survey question about immigration. Unless they are compensated by others, many low-skilled American workers will be substantially worse off if a large number of low-skilled foreign workers were legally allowed to enter the US each year. Agree or disagree? And do you think economists agree or disagree? Okay, so do you agree or disagree? Unless they were compensated by others, many low-skilled American workers would be substantially worse off if a large number of low-skilled foreign workers were legally allowed to enter the US each year. Strongly agree, agree, uncertain, disagree, strongly disagree, no opinion, or prefer not to answer. Okay, so let's look at your answers. A lot of people agree. Some are not sure, some disagree, that's fine. So do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? So 100% economists agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0%, or don't know. Okay, so the majority of you say 50 to 99%. Some say 100%, some say 1 to 49%. And the answer is indeed 50 to 99%. So let's take a look. 60% actually agree that if there are a large number of low-skilled foreign workers immigrate to the US, then low-skilled American workers will be substantially worse off. So up to here, we had 3 different questions. We looked at what happens if highly educated foreign workers are allowed to immigrate into this country. Then the average citizen is better off. Like 95% of economists agree on that. But if it's low-skilled worker, only 60% of the economists agree that the average citizen will be better off. And actually, if you look at only the low-skilled American workers, then having more low-skilled foreign workers coming in, so 60% of the US economists surveyed agree that the low-skilled American workers will be worse off because they will be facing direct competition by these low-skilled foreign workers. Okay, so to conclude, so this chapter is about the neoclassical theory of income distribution. And so the theory developed in this chapter is about factor prices determined by supply and demand. Somebody asked me, would you see supply-demand questions in the final exam? And the answer is here. Because the chapter 18 says the labor market is no different from what the product market you saw in chapter 4. Supply-demand, labor supply, labor demand. But in addition, each factor is paid the value of its marginal product. So when you ask, hey, why am I earning this salary? Don't ask what the company can do for you. Ask what you can do for the company. So this is used by most economists as a starting point to understand income distribution. In the next chapter, immediately we'll see how the reality will deviate from this. But this, what we call neoclassical theory of income distribution, this is the starting point. This is the benchmark. So if all of the assumptions that we made in this chapter is true, this is what we see. But then things are different in the next chapter. All right, so you're watching a pair of debate about immigration. The participants represent two camps: organized labor, so labor unions, and corporate industry. Organized labor argue against open immigration, while the US industry argues in favor of more open immigration. And your friend says, hey, I can't believe that these two groups can't get together on this issue. Both firms and workers joined forces to produce our industrial output. I would think that their interests would be similar. So maybe a better arbitrator could help these groups find a position on immigration that would satisfy both groups. So question A, if there were open immigration, what would happen to the value of marginal product of labor and the wage? B, if there were open immigration, what would happen to the value of marginal product of capital and land and their rental rates? C, are the positions that each group take on immigration consistent with their interests? Explain. Is there likely to be a solution that satisfies both? Why or why not? So all three of these are more or less open questions, so you can provide your responses here. So if there were open immigration, what would happen to the value of the marginal product of labor and the wage? Okay, yeah, so the key thing here is that because you're facing foreign competition, so the labor supply is going to increase because of this foreign immigration. But that means is that you're shifting down the labor demand curve, so wages are going to go down, but employment is going to go up. But this increase in employment is coming from the increase of foreign workers. So domestic workers, they will be losing their job. So the value of marginal product is going to go down, and so wages are going to go down. So in that sense, the labor unions don't like this. Next one. If there were open immigration, what would happen to VMPL for capital and land and their rental rates? Well, if the amount of labor is increased because of the foreign workers, because of immigration, but what that means is that the MPL for land and capital is actually going to go up because now you have more labor to work on these land and capital. So both VMPL and their rental prices are indeed going to go up. All right, so because of time, let's move on to the last question. Are the positions that each group take on immigration consistent with their interest? And is it likely to have a solution between, so here is the corporate industry versus the organized labor or the labor unions? So are their positions consistent with their interests, and is there a solution that everybody's happy? Okay, so because of time, I think I would have to just discuss this with everybody. Yeah, so as we saw in the first two questions, VMP for labor is going to go down, wages is going to go down. And of course, labor unions would not be happy about this. So they are definitely against open immigration. But VMPL for land and capital is going to go up. And so land prices, the rental prices for land and capital are going to go up. So the corporate industry will be happy. They will welcome open immigration. So both groups are acting according to their interests, one against and one for open immigration. So the question is, how can you strike a compromise so that both sides will be happy? So yeah, so one possibility is there a way that we can compensate, say, local workers, the loss or due to this open immigration? In Singapore, they actually calculate this cost, and they charge the employers exactly that amount. And of course, that means is that you can freely hire, say, care workers or whatever foreign workers you want, or as long as you pay this cost. In Taiwan, it's a completely different story. I mean, they have quotas, and then they have these brokers that you have to try to apply for the brokers. And then they have all these different criteria, like, oh, so your parent have to be disabled up to this level so that you can qualify for a part-time or a full-time foreign worker and all that. There's a whole bunch of rules there. And in the end, it seems that it's the brokers that are making a lot of money there. It's not easy, but it's possible. But by definition, these two parties have conflict of interest. All right, so to summarize this chapter, so we talked about markets for factor production, land, labor, and capital. We mainly looked at labor markets. The key difference between factor markets and what we saw in chapter 4 is that demand is derived. The firms hired these factors of production not because they like it, it's because they want to maximize profit. They want to use it as inputs to produce output to sell in the output market. And because of this, so they're willing to hire up to the amount, the wage they want to pay or the rental price they want to pay has to equal to the value of marginal product. And for labor supply, it's the trade-off between labor and leisure. So on the market, again, supply demand is balanced at the equilibrium wage or rental price. So you have this parallel between what you see in chapter 4 in this chapter. And the key new insights, one is that the factors of production are paid directly tied to their value of marginal contribution. So don't ask what the company can do for you, ask what you can do for the company. And the other thing is that there is this linkage between different factors. When we increase capital, well, of course, the marginal product of capital goes down, the VMP for capital goes down, and so the rental price for capital goes down. But the marginal product for labor would go up, the VMPL would go up, wages for labor would go up. So there's this linkage. Okay, so here's my one-page summary. Labor market is just another market, just that you have derived demand. And you have output supply and input demand to be two sides of one coin. And labor supply is about work versus leisure. And the land and capital are similar. So here's the homework from Manku chapter 18. And so here are the past finals I have given for this chapter. I feel like people now are advancing in the technology exactly to reduce the number of labor needed. It's counterintuitive that it increases demand for labor. Okay, yeah, so I'm glad you bring this up. Okay, the first thing is, let's look at the past. So in the past few decades, you see computer technology, the internet. If you are a highly educated worker, well, that means your productivity actually goes up because now you can utilize computers, you can use the internet and be even more productive than before. However, if you are a low-skill worker, well, then you lose your job. I mean, for example, if you're in the printing press, in the old days, they have these workers who physically try to put the print together. But now you have Microsoft Word, you have Publisher, you have these computer technology to replace that. So if you are a low-skill worker, then your job is replaced. Machinery has been replacing these handmade products, although it depends. I mean, there are some, like for example, if you go to the back door of NTU, you will see 阿玉水饺, handmade dumplings. You'll see like dozens of workers there making dumplings by hand. And they claim that this is better than machine. Well, of course, I mean, that means that they have some very special technique that the machine cannot easily replace. But it is true that a lot of the mass production of, say, dumplings are replaced by machines. And only the high-skilled, the specialized workers, they can still survive because they can make something that's specialized, that's better, and they utilize these new technology advancements. So it is true that there is a divide here because labor is different. There's high-skilled labor and low-skilled labor. And a lot of times the low-skilled labor are replaced by technology. And so, yeah, in that sense, they're worse off. But the high-skilled labor that can utilize, that are complements to technology advancement, yeah, their productivity is actually going to go up. So there is a discrepancy there.